Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Bobby Jindal is leaving, Sean Payton is staying, and Mike Yenni has moved in. This was a week of positioning for the governor, the Saints coach, and Jefferson Parish's new president. We'll look at all three, as well as the status of Medicaid in the state. Our Future Watch segment examines the charity hospital building redevelopment. And with the local football season over, we'll look for better luck on the basketball court. Starting for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. And we go to Stephanie first because come Monday we have a new governor. Right. So this is the last weekend of Bobby Jindal's tenure as governor of the state of Louisiana. What has it been like for him and for us over these past 8 years?
Wow. Well, one of the strange things about these last days is that he's here. He's in the state. He's not off in Iowa running for president. That obviously did not go so well for him. It's strange, you know, we all met him 20 years ago. He was 24. He was this guy for whom the sky was the limit, became a cabinet secretary at a very early age, Congress, all of these big jobs in Washington and in Baton Rouge, governor. And he's 44 now, and this might be it. We don't know. It's certainly it for now in terms of his public career, and he leaves with very low approval ratings, as low as 20% in one poll, really being blasted by Democrats and Republicans alike for the state in which he's left the budget. Over the holidays, we heard from the incoming administration that, you know, as bad as we knew things were, they're even worse. Between this year's budget and next year's budget, they're looking at finding almost, you know, $2 billion, basically.
Yeah, and Jay Darden didn't mince words, our new commissioner of administration.
And of course, he never has. When he ran for governor, he put the blame on Jindal, and of course, he still did. Now, you know, you have to factor in the fallen oil prices, which has affected state income and also starting to affect the economy in the state. But really, a lot of it is management of the budget. And the strange thing is, in these past few weeks, we really have Bobby Jindal doing this farewell tour, really trying to get the last word in and talk about his legacy. And it's like everyone's having one conversation, and he's having a totally different conversation. He's talking about things he did over 8 years, ethics reform, education, privatizing the charity hospitals, of course, downsizing state government, which he says is absolutely a good thing. And he's really not talking about the budget. When people ask him about it, he says, we balance the budget every year, which they did, because they're required by law to do that. The issue is they did it with a lot of smoke and mirrors and borrowing from one-time money and kind of not really sustainable budgeting. And he really treats it like it's a complete non-issue, and it's just really jarring to see the two conversations happening. And again, most of the Republicans, his fellow Republicans, are having the other conversation because they still have to deal with it.
Well, this budget crisis aside, and you know, it's certainly not pushing it aside, but just for this point of this discussion right now, what are the significant things that Bobby Jindal did do for the state of Louisiana, or to the state of Louisiana?
Well, I think, you know, like as with every governor, the story will be written down the road and won't be written immediately. And, you know, he privatized the charity hospitals. Like we said, we're still just at the beginning of that, and it's unclear which, you know, they're not totally sustainable at this point. There's still some work that needs to be done, kind of how that will look in retrospect. Some very big changes to K through 12 education, of course. Teacher tenure was all but eliminated, a real expansion of charter schools, vouchers, which of course the new governor is skeptical about. So, you know, they're going to stay, but probably not expand anymore, and maybe even contract some. You know, teacher evaluations, a whole lot of issues involving schools. Common Core we've talked about a lot, and that is pretty much going to happen. There was compromise, and Jindal really is not part of that anymore, but really some structural changes to education.
I think of a touching way that became evident how important to the culture the charity hospital system was on the night that John Bell Edwards was elected. He says, here's my mama, and she was a charity hospital nurse.
Exactly.
And from there, she learned the values that she taught us. But could it be argued that looking at the charity hospital system and looking at the education, that sooner or later some governor had to right the excesses from the past that started with Huey Long?
Sure.
And was he the guy, or did he do it right?
And would it have happened anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, the people who would argue it wasn't done right would say that the financing is not in place for them to be sustainable at this point, and there's still a lot of work to do on that. Of course, the timing is, we had Hurricane Katrina, so there was a decision that had to be made on what to do with Charity Hospital, and there was an interesting coalition. It wasn't just Bobby Jindal was for not going back into the old Charity building the new center, so was Mitch Landrieu, and then David Vitter was against. So you kind of, the sides were mixed up. But, that really was a decision point, and they did go forward with, the new building and everything else involving private operators and across the state.
And he did stand behind that new hospital at a time when there was a lot of
he did, yeah.
a lot of flack on that.
One of the things that's interesting is the Democratic incoming governor, whose mom was a Charity Hospital baby, he's not against this. He's not going to try to push back. I mean, it's a done deal, and he really, I think, is somewhat supportive of what's going on with the privatization. So it probably did have to happen, and it also coincides with the Affordable Care Act, and the changes in financing for uninsured patients. All of that is mixed up in this.
And the shrinking of government. I mean, he's reduced the size of the number of employees, state employees, right?
The number he used on the campaign trail was 30,000. He would call them 30,000 bureaucrats, which of course is a loaded term. A lot of those are people who worked in hospitals who now work,
public
nurses
hospitals around the state, because the whole system wasn't just here in New Orleans.
And there have been some real
the
problems in Shreveport and other areas it's worked better, but there are issues blowing up around the state. He has downsized government. He did sign the biggest tax cut in state history. He kind of did it reluctantly early in his tenure. This was the rollback of the steady income tax increases, which he then went on the campaign trail and really boasted about. But a lot of people point to that and say, that was during the time of the post-Katrina bubble, and when we had a lot of money coming in, and we really couldn't afford that long term, and that's part of the reason we are in the state we're in. He completely rejects that thought. He says you need smaller government, or you have a growing private sector. You can't have both. And of course, that's not a universally held idea at all.
Well, on the one hand, I think some voters can understand that he had to make some tough decisions.
Sure.
But at the same time, they may have felt a sense of abandonment. At the same time he's making these tough decisions, he's not here.
And he's also, the feeling is he's making these decisions based on how they would look to voters in other states as opposed to what's best long-term here. Yeah. Absolutely, that's a feeling.
So he and his family have moved out of the mansion. They have a new home.
In South Baton Rouge.
On to his next steps for whatever the future
brings. Whatever they will be, yes.
All right, Stephanie, thanks a lot. Well, we do know that somebody is staying, and that's our coach, our Saints coach, Sean Payton, who had an hour-long press conference, which was what unheard of, and he seemed, I got to say, he seemed like a really happy camper.
Yeah, that was unprecedented, Marcia. I've covered Sean Payton a long time, his entire decade of his tenure, and he's never had a press conference like that. And I think that was significant. It showed that there was more going on here than maybe they even revealed in the press conference. They kind of Sean downplayed, I think, what was going on behind closed doors. 10 years into his tenure, there's a coaching axiom that sometimes your message gets stale and you should move on to a new job. His mentor, Bill Parcells, rarely stayed longer than 3 or 4 years in one spot. And I think Sean was taking some personal inventory about this time in his career. I know a year ago, especially when the team went 7-9, he felt like maybe he was losing his effectiveness as a head coach and really started to question whether he maybe would be best served moving on, and maybe it would be best for the Saints if he moved on. He was getting a little stale, and I think this past year invigorated him, and I think is what tilted the axis to him staying here. But clearly, this was an important date in the organization. I mean, the fact that Tom and Gail Benson were at the press conference, Dennis Lauscha and Mickey Loomis, the vice presidents, were all there. I mean, that doesn't happen unless there's something significant going on. So I think it was a great day for the Saints organization, because Sean Payton is clearly the best coach in the history of the organization. He is the alpha male, if you will, of that organization. And if he'd have left, I think it would have been devastating for the morale.
Do you think that year that he was out of the game, that he was suspended, may have hurt more than people think, and that he may have lost, well, certainly the defensive side of the operation went into a spiral during that period of time, and that he may have really lost some sort of control during that time?
No, I think what he lost was Greg Williams, the defensive coordinator, who they let go after that season. And he brought in Steve Spagnuolo. It didn't work out. Then he made what I consider to be a very ill-fated decision to hire Rob Ryan, and he ended up letting him go this year. They feel like they've got the defense fixed with Dennis Allen. They've got to get better players. But I really think it was more personnel. And what's led to this downfall is a natural cycle of events in a Super Bowl championship team. You start paying people a lot of money. They're big contracts. You're in a salary cap league. Drew Brees is making $20 million a year. You've got to really manage the salary cap and manage the roster well, and they haven't done that. And Sean acknowledged that on Wednesday at the press conference. Mm-hmm. They've got to do a better job of scouting and personnel evaluation, and I think that's part of what led to the house cleaning in the offseason a year ago.
Well, he really professed that he's a New Orleanian, and this is where he wants to be.
Potholes and all.
Yeah. If the Atlanta game hadn't turned out the way it did, this last Atlanta game, would we be talking this way right now?
You know, that's a good question, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that he looked at it that impulsively. Sean is a very impulsive person. It's what makes him a very good coach sometimes as a play caller, and it's also, I think, sometimes one of his character flaws is he can make impulsive decisions. I don't know if he made the entire decision based on that one game. I think it had more to do with the entire stretch. But after they lost that game at home, I think it was in week 13, and they dropped to 5-9. If they would have lost those last two games and ended up 5-11, I don't think it's a stretch to say he might have gone in a different direction. But the way the team rallied, I think, encouraged him. And, I think it's good news for the Saints because I don't think they would ever find a coach that fits that organization, that fits the city as well as he does. I'm certain that Drew Brees would agree with that.
How would Drew Brees have handled a different coach, do you think?
Right. I mean, he made the Pro Bowl in San Diego under Marty Schottenheimer, so he's confirmed as a Pro Bowl level player, but he would never reach I think the confidence level that he has with Sean Payton. I mean, he really is the yin and yang there, and between those two, they've led the Saints to unprecedented success.
Jeff, you mentioned that Tom and Gail Benson were there Sunday before last. You had that front page article in the Picayune suggesting that maybe
I don't remember that.
Suggesting that maybe it was time for him to sell. And, have you talked to him? He reacted strongly against it, but have you had any interaction?
No, I haven't talked to him. I talked, of course, to people in the organization, and I still feel very strongly about that opinion. I don't think the current succession plan in place leads to the best possibility of a successful organization. I think it can be, but I think there are people in town that have the means and the interest to run the team, and I think at the age of 88, with facing a protracted, it could be ugly legal fight, and I know what that did to Tom Benson's health earlier, the earlier legal fight that he had. I just feel like there's a lot of uncertainty going forward. Gail Benson, who is going to be the new owner of the team, 3 years ago when I talked to the organization about the succession plan, was not interested in running the New Orleans Saints. Now 3 years later, she's going to be the priority owner. So I think there's a lot of questions about that, and I also think there's a lot of questions about the way the hierarchy of the organization without a true dominant executive there to run things. There's a lot of accountability issues.
Isn't Dennis Lauscher the key guy, though?
Yes, Dennis and Mickey Loomis will basically be running the organization. Frankly, they have for a while. And they will tout stability, and I understand that. That's something the Saints have never had in the past, and that's been one of the strengths currently of the organization. I just question at that age and the potential for a loss in the legal fight, where that's going to lead to, the future in this organization because of the uncertainty of the lawsuit.
Well, that's up for future discussions for us, I'm sure. And let's come. Thanks a lot, Jeff. And we're going to go over to Errol now. And Jefferson Parish has a new president.
It does. Mike Yenni, this is the Yenni family. This will be the third Yenni that's in there, which is the tradition of his grandfather, Joe Yenni, started as a reform mayor in Kenner. And so it certainly shows that Kenner has the clout in Jefferson Parish politics, but I think it has produced some competent politicians. And being a mayor of Kenner is a good stepping stone. Aaron Broussard, who's out of town at the moment, was also a mayor of Kenner. But the changes changes are not monumental. The parish president's office became open because John Young was term limited, and he ran for lieutenant governor. Of the 7 members, and the structure of Jefferson Parish government is almost exactly like New Orleans, that you have a 7-member council with 5 district and 2 at large. In New Orleans, they call the executive mayor, and in Jefferson Parish, they call him parish president. And in Jefferson, you elect the head of the police department, who's the sheriff, and in Orleans, he's appointed by the mayor. But it's a similar structure. But there was only one change in the council. There was one vacancy. Cynthia Lee Shang, who represents District 5, which is the Metairie area, got elected to an at-large position. That was Elton Lagasse's. And so Jennifer Van Vranken was elected to that. And so it's an experienced council that goes in with a new parish president who's certainly experienced in government, if not that exact position. And you look at the things that they talked about, and Jefferson Parish, I mean, it's a powerhouse, and it's very prosperous. It's got the largest population in the state. But the kind of things they talk about now is, as well as things are going, maybe it's time for a little infrastructure improvement or rebuilding some of the housing developments and kind of just touching up and rebuilding for the future. And so that seemed to be the direction. And there's more of a crime problem on the West Bank. And so the West Bank probably takes more of a harder looking at now. But it moves on. But going into the elections a year ago, it looked like David Vitter would likely be elected governor. It looked like John Young would likely be elected lieutenant governor. We already had Steve Scalise in Congress. And so it looked like Jefferson Parish was going to really be the powerhouse, and it really didn't work out quite that way on the state level, except for Newell Norman. I mean,
yes. New power there.
Newell Norman's unquestionably one of the most influential political people in the state, and probably out of Jefferson Parish too.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see what direction the new government will direct Jefferson Parish to. Over to Dawn right now, and we had some news this week about charity.
Well, we decided this week we were going to talk about Charity Hospital. Charity Hospital, aside from a Christmas tree that was not a Christmas tree that in there in the past week, has not been in the news since July, when there were bids that came in for redevelopment. Governor Jindal at the time solicited bids for redeveloping, got in 5. For lack of a better word, legitimate bids of groups that wanted to come in and redo the whole building, make it apartments, make it biomedical offices, a bunch of different things. The commission that he seated to look through those bids met only once, and then said, as of this week, we didn't have enough information. We really don't know whether it's better for the state that we say we should sell the building, should we lease the building, how much money it's really worth. So they have decided, as was announced today, and that they are scrapping all of those proposals, starting fresh, hiring a consultant, much like the city did, looking at the World Trade Center site, to really analyze the real estate and say what it's worth, how can you get the biggest bang for your buck, is it sale, is it lease. I talked to State Representative Helena Moreno yesterday, and she said, look, this might only delay things happening on Charity for a month or two. It might delay it a whole lot more. It might speed it up. It really all depends on John Bell Edwards and the changeover in the administration. State Treasurer John Kennedy had actually asked Governor Jindal to wait, say, let's not rush this. It's too important a building. It's historically important. It's architecturally important. Let's not rush the redevelopment here. Let's wait. So he was on board with the Democrats for that. The Downtown Development District was engaged in helping the state promote the building for the national interest. Their folks told me this week they're disappointed that it's slowing down because they think we're in a very good economic cycle, and now is the time to promote the city to people of national interest and get that business development. It is the perfect time for developing. So the timing has to be right. The timing's right now, and hopefully that timing will last through at least the next couple of years to get the right developers in and redevelop that 76-year-old building. Remember, the city had looked at it, and the whole reason the proposals had to go out again this summer was when the city decided they weren't going to spend the $400 million to redo it and move City Hall there, partly because they couldn't get a guarantee of $100 million from the state. So,
well, certainly one of the big issues there is, do we lease it or do we sell it? And that was one of the proposals, was to actually purchase the building.
Right, and I have heard that the conditions of the building building may not be what people think it to be, too. Once you look a little deeper, are there structural problems with the building? Is it going to cost more than $400 million or so to renovate
All
it?
indications, whatever it is, it's going to be some sort of a multi-purpose facility.
It will be multi-purpose. It's best suited for all sorts of things, but biomedical, residential, short-term stays for people getting cancer treatment or something, a long-term kind of apartment, but not yearly.
And so, and talking about that whole complex, it's more than just the charity hospital
It's more
building.
than just the charity. It's several additional buildings on either side. It is the whole complex, all the Art Deco structure built 76 years ago.
So it's a massive undertaking.
It is a massive
undertaking.
The timing as it was laid out in the spring when the bids were solicited back in April was that a possible selection would happen by July with a final agreement in the fall of 2015. Now it's anyone's guess.
Yeah.
Even when a request for bids will go out, when they'll come back, when they'll be decided, who will even be looking at it, that's all up to Governor Edwards now.
Will the same commission stay in place? We don't know.
It's up to Governor Edwards.
All right.
And so as Bobby Jindal, the budget cutter, leaves office, whereas looking at the building built back in the long era in the charity hospital system.
That could, some of the people who had submitted bids said, look, we were ready to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a building or in taxes that the state could have now.
We start again.
We
so
start
we'll find
fresh.
out what goes on. Okay, we have to go over to Stephanie now. Medicaid expansion, which the new governor says will happen.
Will happen sooner rather than later. There was some question. He campaigned very heavily on this issue. Of course, Bobby Jindal had refused to accept this Medicaid expansion, which is part of the Affordable Care Act. If you think back, the framers of the Affordable Care Act meant for every state to expand Medicaid for people who are up to 138% of the poverty level. After that, the subsidies in the private markets open up. And what happened is the Supreme Court said that Medicaid expansion, the federal government could not order it. And a bunch of governors, generally Republican governors in very conservative states, said that they wouldn't do it. So it left a gap of really the poorest of the working poor not able to get any benefit from this law. Governor Edwards, this was a centerpiece of his campaign. He said he would do it on day one. Late in the campaign, even after he was elected, there was some question of whether it would have to be delayed because there's some enabling legislation that may need to be redone that basically allows private hospitals to pick up the local match for it. But he said this week that we're going ahead with it. He's going to issue an executive order. The legislature does not have to consider it. The new head of health and hospitals is going to hire a bunch of people to process applications. They have federal funding for that, 75%. And they're going to, hope to get people signed up July 1st. And we're talking, the estimates have varied, but the working number right now is about 300,000 people. And these, again, are generally people who work at very low-wage jobs who don't have benefits.
So he says by the second day of his administration, he will have signed this executive order.
Signed it,
if not sooner. And so, as you said, by July 1st, people will then be eligible to start signing up according to his plan? Is that how he sees it?
Yes. They're just putting the pieces in place. He just named his health director last week, and it's interesting. Rebecca Gee is her name. She's an OBGYN from New Orleans, and she was the head of the Medicaid program within that department before. So this is her area of expertise. And this is happening at the same time there are a bunch of other problems with Medicaid. Even though all these people are going without care, still about a quarter of the population of Louisiana is on Medicaid, and there have been real cost increases over the Jindal years, and everyone's kind of trying to figure out why. And so there are a lot of moving parts here, but the expansion piece seems to be full steam ahead.
He's committed to it, and it's something that Louisiana will be participating in.
It's interesting. I spoke to him before a couple weeks ago. I wrote a column for Sunday talking about this. He really sees part of his mission as addressing poverty in this state, and this is a really important part of it in his mind.
Okay, Stephanie, thanks a lot. Back over to Jeff. Okay, football season over, but basketball season is still there, and so what about our Pelicans?
Well, yeah, this is the time when we normally turn our attention to basketball down here in January, and the Pelicans are struggling. Very disappointing season so far, 11-23, 1 year removed from going to the playoffs. I think everybody thought the organization was ready to take the next step with Alvin Gentry, the new coach, and it's been quite the drop-off. And I expect there to be some changes coming up, whether it's with the lineup or with maybe some potential trades now that Alvin Gentry has been here a few months, had a chance to evaluate the players and how they fit into his system. I don't think he's happy at all with how things are going, and I think he and Dell Demps are going to have to shake things up if they want to try and get the interest back from the fan base, because I think it's already started to wane locally. And I don't know what else to say other than it's just been incredibly disappointing. And I think Alvin Gentry is starting to question why he came here, because he came from the Golden State Warriors, who are having one of the greatest seasons in the history of the NBA. And he ran into a buzzsaw here.
I was at the
Dennis
game.
Lauscha stretched too thin doing the Saints and the Pelicans?
Well, Dennis Lauscha running the business side, and Mickey Loomis is really the one running the basketball operations, and that's a very common question that a lot of people have. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Saints and Pelicans address that at some point. I think maybe potentially try and get Mickey Loomis another executive in there to help manage that, because Mickey Loomis, frankly, right now is running the Saints and Pelicans operation along with Dennis Lauscha. He's more of an administrator than he is the granular, hands-on football guy that he started here.
Back to the question of why he came here. Wouldn't it have been Anthony Davis? I mean, you got one of the really great stars.
Right, and look, the star power right now in basketball, along with Ben Simmons, the freshman at LSU, who is being touted as the best basketball player to come through the American basketball system since LeBron James. I mean, this is a phenomenal talent, along with Anthony Davis, who it's hard to believe he's only 23 years old, but we have two of the best young basketball players in the world right here within Baton Rouge and New Orleans. So the teams aren't doing as well, but if you want to go see great talent, we've got two of the best here.
So changes, would they come soon?
I think so, yes. I think we'll see something in the next couple of weeks. I think you're going to see some players traded. I think it's time for Alvin Gentry to shake things up and get it going the way he wants.
Okay, we'll be looking for it. Time to look ahead.
Okay. Well, it's carnival season, and a few years ago, the Rex organization started a pro bono publico foundation where each year they give a big contribution to public education. So far, they've given about $3.4 million. Well, tomorrow, they're going to announce the contribution to a number of education foundations, public education. They've embargoed how much and how many places they're going to give it to, but it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of recipients, and they're going to announce it tomorrow.
Okay, thanks, Errol. Jeff.
Well, 2 weeks out, January 23rd, Steve Gleason will have his documentary film debuting at the Sundance Film Festival out in Park City, Utah. And it's, from all I've heard, it's going to be an incredible documentary. It has a great chance, I think, to score some awards out there. 5 years ago this month was when Steve was diagnosed with ALS, so this has documented his life since then.
I'm sure it's a powerful story. Don.
Starting Sunday, more than 3,000 weather experts, et cetera, will be at the Convention Center for the American Meteorological Society's annual meeting. It's their 96th annual meeting, and they'll be meeting here again in 2021, 25, and 29.
Okay.
So lots of meteorology questions.
And lots of politics. Monday, John Bel Edwards gets sworn in, largely ceremonial day, but there will be some news that day. The House has to elect a speaker, and it's actually contested. The odds-on favorite is Walt Leger from New Orleans, the Democrat, the incoming governor's choice, but it's being contested by Cameron Henry from Jefferson Parish. The Republican majority in the legislature wants one of his own. It looks like there's going to be a vote, which is unusual.
So a race to see this Monday.
Yes.
See what the results are. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.